Thank you for staying with us. The Kogi State government this week distributed 50 truckloads of rice to indigent citizens as a palliative to cushion economic hardship in the state. Speaking during the distribution at the Muhammadu Buhari Square in Lokoja, Governor Ahmed Ododo warned officials against diversion and hoarding of the palliative. The governor said the intervention was strictly meant for the indigents at the lower level of the socio-economic spectrum of the society. The rice will be distributed to households across the 239 wards in the 21 local government areas of the state. Now, joining me via Zoom is Joel Kemi, doctoral researcher, public affairs analyst. Of course, Joel, good to have you on the show this evening. Joel, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. All right, now quickly, Governor Ahmed Ododo has flagged off the distribution of food palliatives in the first quarter of the year. How do you evaluate this initiative?
Well, it's a welcome development considering what the impact, the economic impact that this subsidy removal is having on average Nigerians. And well, as much as it is a laudable development, but I don't think it's because all of these are interim measures to tackle the situation, okay? And for me, I think it's an incremental policy in tackling a long-term problem. And in the past, we've seen situations where state governments reel out some of these handouts to citizens to cushion certain effects and all of that. But my problem is how sustainable it's all of this. We understand that people need this food and all of that at this time, but how sustainable is the distribution of this food? And if you give people these handouts at this time, so what happens next? Is it going to continue for the next 5 years, the next 3 years, the next 4 years? What do we see at the end of this? And you agree with me that in as much as food is important at this very critical time of the Nigerian economy, you still agree with me that it's not all about the food. What about other critical sectors? What about the transportation? What about housing? What about healthcare? What about other things? What about things that make life worth living? Not just the food. And we've said this times and again. What measure, because I heard the governor saying they will see how they can monitor the process and all of that. But what measures would the government put in place to ensure that people who actually need these things get them? Because in this same country, Nigeria, we've seen situations where donor agencies will donate things to be distributed to the poor people, and then you find these things in the market. Okay, so how are we sure that these things would end up, in the market for people to use scarce resources to buy things that that should come from the government to sustain them at some point? So it's a laudable initiative. The poor people will have this. But what happens in the long run? Because the subsidy removal, according to the president, has come to stay. So what happens after now? What would the people, continue to get this from government? Because these programs are very expensive. The government cannot sustain this for a very long time. So what happens after now?
Okay.
You see, yes.
All right, Joel. I totally understand what you're trying to say. Now, you're saying that this measure might not be sustainable. Now, but you understand that food is very crucial, and this particular palliative is targeting the lower level indigents in the state. Now, do you have an alternative idea that could have made it better?
Yes, I think I've said this times and again that when you try to implement incremental public policy, you're only dealing with the issue at the moment. What happens in the long run? And in view of this, take a holistic look at the problem, okay? How do you empower the people beyond giving them handouts, okay? Because if you look at when the governors had the meeting with the president on how to mitigate the crisis, the food crisis and all of that, and then they said agriculture is the way forward. Agriculture is the way forward. And I asked myself, if agriculture is the way forward, in this year's budget, the 362.9 billion was earmarked for agriculture. Now, this is like 1.5% of the entire budget for the year. And if out of this sum, about 252 billion will go for capital expenditure under the Ministry of Agriculture, 102 billion will go for personnel, 80 billion will go for overhead. Now, what happens to people who are farmers? Now, Kogi State is one state that is very, very rich, farming and all of that. Why don't you, so many river Niger is there, and you and I know fishery is one, craft or one job that people in Kogi State, given the right economic environment, given the right tools, given the right encouragement from government, given the right enabling environment, it will thrive. So if you give people handouts at the end of the day, what happens next? So for me, the one way to get this right is,
all right, Joy.
create an environment so where people will, engage in activities that will put money in their pocket, so they can, look at other aspects of life and be able to sustain that.
All right, Joy, let's come to Lagos now. The Lagos State Governor has also announced a series of measures to ease the cost of living crisis, such as engaging 1,000 caterers to provide free meals daily, creating 42 markets for subsidized food stuff, and reducing public transport fares by 25%. Now, what is your opinion on this intervention?
Yes.
Briefly, quickly, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one, like I said. But if you look at 25% on public transport, has the government engaged because if you look at Lagos, the BRT board, yes, the government too is doing quite well in terms of the public transportation. But what about those with the downfalls and the other buses? Because the cost of fuel, you and I know, has skyrocketed. So what has the government done, with the private transport owners regarding this 25%? Because everybody cannot enter the BRT bus. Everybody cannot enter the government public buses. So what happens to the private bus operators in terms of the cost of operations, the normal levy taxes and all of that? How do they mitigate all of this? And part of the measures I see that the government says engaging Mama Put. Like I said, and all of that, giving people food in the interim is not really a solution, because judging from what the president said, fuel subsidy has come to stay. Okay. So if we continue to do incremental public policy for long-term problems, well, all of this is just impoverishing the people the more. And what measure is the government putting? How soon would all of this take place? What measure is the government putting in place to ensure that these things are sustainable? We live in a society where sometimes law and order is a problem. So how would the government mitigate all of this to ensure that these interim measures to cushion this effect, it's a success? So I really have a problem with all of that.
Okay, Joy, thank you very much. Everything you have outlined is fantastic, but I think you're really hammering on sustainability. Well, we'll take a time out now, and Newsweek continues in a moment. Stay with us.